Shared Ocean podcast brings you stories of lived experience from across the world as part of Ireland's response to the environmental and economic challenges facing many small island developing states. These proud island nations are on the front line in tackling climate change issues and are supported by Ireland in this critical battle by the Our Shared Ocean programme, a funding initiative by the Government of Ireland delivered by Irish Aid and the Marine Institute.
Hi everybody, good morning and good afternoon. My name is David O'Sullivan and welcome to the Our Shared Ocean podcast, a platform for marine scientists and researchers from around the world to talk about their work. They will tell us about some of the challenges facing small island developing states and how their expertise and research is meeting those challenges. Today we're heading to the Caribbean via Maynooth and Bermuda to hear about the implications of a changing climate for storm frequency and intensity. Are we getting more storms? Are they getting worse? And how exactly do we know? So this discussion is very relevant to islanders and coastal communities all over the world and specifically within the small island developing states. To tell us more about that, I am very pleased to welcome Dr. Samantha Hallam from NUI, Maynooth University. Professor Donovan Campbell, who is Professor of Environmental Geography at University of the West Indies in Mona, and Randy Aird, who is the who's a research assistant on this project called TOPIM, which we're going to get to. Randy, your camera is off, just FYI. Dr. Samantha Hallam is a senior postdoctoral researcher at the Irish Climate Analysis and Research Unit in Maynooth University, which is actually my alma mater, with research interests in ocean variability and how that influences atmospheric and climatic dynamics. She's the principal investigator on TOPIM, which is this project, tropical cyclone potential intensity model, which we're going to hear about, and how the implications of that. So it's kind of been led in some parts by Ireland, and there's implications for that into the Caribbean, but essentially looking at how hurricanes and how strong they are. And Randy is the research assistant on this project as well. He studied experimental biology at the University of the West Indies, worked with the Jamaican Forestry Department on carbon stock monitoring program, and which enabled Jamaica to meet its climate goals. And as mentioned, Professor Donovan Campbell, environmental geography. Randy, if you're with us, we might start with you as a researcher based in the Caribbean who was studied in Ireland. Maybe you have some reflections on the difference in life in the Caribbean versus doing a master's in Maynooth. I think we've lost Randy there for a minute, so we might just jump into we'll start with yourself then, Professor Campbell, if you don't mind. You're based in the University of West Indies as we speak. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, I guess.
Yes.
How is life in Jamaica today?
Yeah, life is pretty good. When people think of Jamaica, the Caribbean, they think of Bob Marley, they think of the beach, they think of, a good vibe. Yeah. I'm really looking forward to the conversation because there's another side to the Caribbean, to small island states that people often don't see. Yeah. But generally, it's a tourism paradise. People love the Caribbean because of the beautiful beaches, the wonderful culture, the people, and just the shared beauty of the space.
Yeah, absolutely. They do generally think of the fun times first, but we're probably going to hear in this that it's not all fun and games at the moment. So we're looking forward to that. Randy, I think you're dropping in and out with your Wi-Fi. Hopefully you can hear us at the moment. We'll come back to Randy as time allows. Dr. Samantha Hallam, postdoctoral researcher at Maynooth. How goes it today?
Yeah, no, I'm really good actually, and I'm very excited, to now be leading the project, Project TOPIM. It's just wonderful to have the opportunity actually, which wouldn't be possible without the Our Shared Ocean call, to be honest. And it's really good to be taking a model that we developed in Bermuda to improve hurricane prediction, and then actually have the opportunity of rolling that out across the Caribbean, so adapting it for the Caribbean, and then rolling it out, and then also be able in the future as well to take it a warmer ocean scenario and say, if this hurricane that just happened in a 2-degree warmer ocean, how much stronger would it be? And that's all what we're going to be able to do through the TOPIM project. So yeah, it's exciting.
Okay, so we'll strip that back a little bit, but basically we're out the TOPIM, which is the Tropical Cyclone Potential Intensity Model. TOPIM for short will provide the West Indies with a local operational tool to assist hurricane predictions, and that will ultimately help with local preparedness. So the more time we have to know that a storm is coming, the more we can do about it. So it'll give an indication of the future threat also of tropical cyclones in the region. And I understand there's plenty of tropical cyclones and hurricanes in the region. Is there more of them? Are they getting stronger? We hear this in the news, so maybe you guys can take it through it. So like in a normal, so I'm reading from an article which you guys produced last year, which was in Brainstorm on RTE, and it's talked about hurricanes in Ireland. And at the time it was in September, and 3 ex-hurricanes hit Ireland in September just last year. The remnants of ex-tropical storm Ophelia, storm Agnes, and ex-hurricane Nigel, all with the space of about 2 weeks. Now these caused havoc in various places around the west coast of Ireland and the south. So if they're coming from the Caribbean, presumably they've lost a lot of intensity by the time they get here.
Yes, and the hurricanes, the research that that Randy did as part of his master's last year, we looked at how tropical cyclones are coming more towards the UK and Ireland. And obviously what's happening is the warmer oceans that we're getting is that tropical cyclones can last longer. And obviously they steer, when we actually get a warm pool of the ocean warm pool, what we find is that the Azores high drifts further to the right, and what that means is that more hurricanes can curve towards the Irish shores, and that's what's been happening in more recent years. And last year was a prime example of 3 ex-hurricanes hitting Ireland as 3 storms in September and October last year.
But presumably much stronger on the ground in the Caribbean. And how would they rate it on the ground in the Caribbean? Maybe Randy, I see you're back in now. Hopefully your Wi-Fi is sorted. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can.
Were you based in the Caribbean in the last storm season?
No, I wasn't. I came back at the end of the last hurricane season. So
what does the normal hurricane season look like?
Well, a normal hurricane season is when no hurricane hits us or come close to us. But abnormal hurricane season, or a very active one, is like one that happened in the mid 2000s when we were being hit, or one was coming very close by every month basically. So in the 2000s was very active. In the early 2010 to the mid 2010, that was also very active for us. But as you had indicated last year, we had about 3 or 4 storms heading towards Ireland, and one of the outcomes from my master's was that we were able to detect that we have a uptrend in the amount of storms that's going towards Ireland.
Okay, so the data is showing that there's more storms potentially coming from Ireland. I'm looking at a slide here that Samantha provided in advance of this and looking at global sea surface temperature anomalies from 1850 to 2021, and it shows fairly strong evidence to say that the global sea surface temperature is rising and has been rising for at least 100 years. Is that what I'm reading here?
It is what you're reading here, and I think that's one of the important things. I mean, we talk all the time. Obviously, last year we hit the sort of 1.5 degrees C warming above pre-industrial levels in 2023. And obviously, a key part of the warming of the globe is the warming of the sea surface temperatures. So obviously, you know, we can see that it's been a 0.9 degree C warming over the past since the pre-industrial times, but actually most of that 0.6 of the degree has been in the last 4 decades. So you can actually see that the increase is getting faster. And also, it's not just obviously at the surface, but it's actually below the surface as well. So I don't know whether the viewers know this, but actually 93% of all global warming has actually been absorbed by the oceans. So I mean, that's quite an it's quite an impressive, in a way, fact. And I think that's what's, you know, really quite key. I mean, obviously last year was the El Nino, so the Pacific was really warm, but also the Atlantic was much warmer too. So we had the marine heat wave, as you probably remember, David, around Ireland in June 2023. And that was the highest of any marine heat wave in the waters west of Ireland since records began in 1982. So, you know, and obviously with that warming, we're getting the marine heat waves, we're getting the coral bleaching, and obviously what's most relevant for this podcast is we're getting the far more intense hurricanes and tropical cyclones, and also they're coming closer to the Irish shores, I guess, as well.
There's climate change deniers. Okay, so I'm just wondering what part of this graph, and some people I understand might not be looking at this graph, but this is an upward trend of temperatures, as you said, from about 100 years ago. There was a blip in 1950, actually. We might come back to that. Like, what aspect of this, or what part of this is refutable?
Well,
where are climate change deniers getting their information?
I don't know well, as far as I'm concerned, you know, we see the changes in the CO2 that we're putting into the atmosphere, and we're seeing these rising temperatures. These changes are really kind of undisputed, you know, and we're seeing the impacts of them, I guess, already. I mean, the way that I always see it is, you know, we are seeing the changing climate, and the way I think it's more clear is that we're seeing the changes through the extremes. So it's like the extreme events are becoming either more frequent or more catastrophic. So, you know, where you take a flooding event, instead of being a 1 in 100 event, it's now becoming a 1 in 10 year event. And we're getting the stronger storms. So instead of getting a 35 knot wind, we're getting a 55 knot wind, and we're getting the heat waves and the wildfires. And I think that's really the evidence that we're seeing, you know, that sort of makes it more, you know, less up for debate.
Yeah. Less up for debate. Are these changes reflective of what's happening in the Caribbean, Randy or Donovan, since you're both based in Jamaica? Would you see in your day-to-day or a year on, year out, water temperatures increasing coastally, for example?
Yes, I could jump in, Randy. We have been experiencing a number of changes that can be categorized as unprecedented. And so, yes, there might be deniers, but for those who live in the Caribbean and for those who are at the front line of some of these changes, there's no denying the impacts on their livelihoods. So, you know, it's important to step back a bit and understand the Caribbean is a very geographically diverse region. Yeah, we have the Anglophone, the Hispanic, you know, we have the French Caribbean, you know, so the Caribbean is very diverse geographically. And, this geographical diversity is coupled with a socioeconomic disparity, where some are better able to deal with these impacts, David, than others. In some communities, they lack the capacity, the resources to deal with some of these changes that Samantha mentioned. But for many others, their livelihoods are dependent on the natural environment for survival. The poorest of the poor in the Caribbean depend on the natural environment for survival. So you're talking about poor farmers and fishers and others who, for them, even small deviations in temperatures mean a significant shift in their livelihoods. You're talking about fishers going at sea. When you hear Samantha mention changes in ocean currents, that impacts the migration of fish where they live. More importantly, it impacts the biodiversity. So what we're talking about is not just the climate crisis, but the biodiversity crisis that the Caribbean region is facing, and how these climate changes are being superimposed on already marginalized ecosystems and livelihoods. So what we're talking about here is not the models per se, but really the bread and butter for the poorest of the poor in the Caribbean. And my work, I work a lot in vulnerable communities across the Caribbean. I'm a human geographer by training. And so I spend a lot of time going from country to country in the Caribbean to understand what the livelihood conditions are for these people, the most vulnerable in society, and what solutions we can come up with to help them tackle these challenges. And this project in particular, I was very impressed by the high caliber science that Samantha and her team had put into this model, because we have to shift the narrative a bit, David. So much of the narrative has been on, vulnerability and how badly we are impacted. We have to now move into the solution space. And this model that has been developed and tested, tried, and proven is going to help us with that. It is going to help us to look at what we should be doing to deal with these impacts that are really, significantly undermining the livelihood security of the poorest of the poor in the region. So that's my initial reaction. One thing to keep in mind is that these solutions, they're operating in a time window, and what we're losing as we move through time is that the solution space is narrowing. In other words, the space that we have to implement solutions, we're losing it as temperatures rise, as we lose the capacity of our ecosystems to help us respond. Yeah. And so there's an element of urgency that is needed for actions that can be scaled. And this project is a very good example of an action, a solution that can be scaled so that society or societal solutions can keep pace with what we call these compounding ecosystem challenges that we're facing in the Caribbean.
Compounding ecosystem challenges.
Yes.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit worrying in many ways. I just want to bring you back to the fisheries. What kind of species are we fishing, or do you guys fish, or what kinds of commercial species are out there?
There is a mixture. I mean, we have the coastal, reef, the traditional reef fisheries, your snappers, your parrotfish, your demersal species, and then you have the more pelagic species. You're talking about your tuna fishery, your various types of barracudas and mai in the Eastern Caribbean. So the fishery is quite diverse. But what we're seeing is that diversity is also being significantly impacted, because as you lose critical habitats, then the diversity in the fish that is caught is also decreased. And so when you look at the trend now, it sort of looks like that graph there that Samantha has up there. But if you imagine aquaculture and fish farming, most of the fish we're consuming these days globally, yeah, it's not from capture fishery anymore. Most of it is coming from, aquaculture, yeah. And so what we're seeing is that in the region we are catching less fish locally, yeah, and the size of the fish, David, is also much smaller. So whereas back in the days you could get, big fish, nowadays it's much smaller catch. So the fishers have to be diving deeper. They have to be using methods that are usually not, environmentally friendly, if you may. And so that is the dilemma that a lot of these poor fishers find themselves in as the ecosystem gets degraded and as climate change impacts escalate.
Just a final question for yourself before I move on from this topic. You're after giving us a very good background there into what the actual real implications of climate change are. And you mentioned some of the disadvantaged communities. Where or which countries or which communities are in the Caribbean would you say are most advantaged, in your own opinion?
It's all across the Caribbean. Yeah, in every country, even some of the countries that people consider to be doing better off. We have this global, structure of ranking countries by their Human Development Index, which is not good. Many Caribbean countries were pushing back at that because that type of ranking, it puts vulnerable island states in a bracket that they don't belong. Yeah, they lack the capacity to respond to these events. When you look at Dominica, for example, Dominica, after Category 5 Hurricane Maria in 2017, they lost 226% of their GDP. The impact was 226 times their GDP. How do you recover from that? It set them back more than a decade of development progress, right? And so when you look at it, these communities are all over. So you have to take it down, from the global picture to what the reality is on the ground in the Caribbean. Even in some of the well-off island states, you still find communities, segments. Just because of the socioeconomic imbalances and disparities, you find communities that don't have the capacity to deal with these events. And that is why the narrative around vulnerability has been so strong, because it's the voices from these marginalized communities, structural marginalization, David, that you have in a capitalist society. Some people have access to resources more than others. And so what you find is that those who don't have the means to cope, to deal with these challenges, they find it harder to deal with the impacts of climate change. And they're typically located in coastal communities, but even in the interior of the island. And it's very hard to think about islands as not coastal. Everywhere in an island is coastal, yeah, in the Caribbean. So it's very hard to think of it separate from that. But these coastal communities that have to be dealing with coastal changes where landing sites are being eroded. They are seeing it firsthand, but also in the interior where farming activities are pronounced, you have changes in the seasonal weather patterns. Farmers in the Caribbean are used to, because most of it is rain-fed, they depend on these signals from the environment to know when to plant, to know what to plant. Yeah. And so because these signals are changing, it complicates things for them. And so the crop losses we're seeing are becoming greater. Yeah. And the uncertainty in terms of what to do when is becoming greater. And so we see where right across the board, there's no one country that can say I'm resilient to climate change. The impacts are right across the board. You will always find people who in these islands will be worse off in terms of the impacts.
And just to mirror that, I mean, those implications you're describing across the Caribbean region, we found, and obviously are happening all across the Pacific, very island communities and coastal communities in Ireland. A lot of the fishers will tell you that the fish stocks are changing drastically, biodiversity is changing. So yeah, these are reflective global patterns, unfortunately, and as you said, then it's in the structural marginalization allows the more advanced or developed countries. Again, it's not a term that universally agreed upon in the Caribbean, for example, but they're the countries that generally do better out of it.
Can I just chip
Rand,
in there? Can I just chip
please
in?
come in,
Sorry.
Samantha. Yeah.
Is that okay? Yeah. And I just wanted to say, certainly in terms of all the research that's been done today, certainly in terms of the sort of small island developing states and the tropical cyclones, I mean, as you were mentioning, Donovan, about 2017, but also Hurricane Irma in 2017, which was a Cat 5 hurricane. I mean, that made Bermuda as an island completely uninhabitable. And there was 95% damage to all the structures in that year from that tropical cyclone. And I think it's estimated that of the small island developing states in the Atlantic are the most vulnerable anywhere from the changing risk of increased hurricane intensity. So, I think in terms of the highest risk estimates, in terms of annual expected damages, are found around Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico, typically around sort of 1.5 billion per annum in terms of US dollars. But as you were just mentioning, Donovan, the small island developing states, you just don't have the financial resources to be anyway capable of dealing with that. So, helping to understand the risk and how to plan for it is kind of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, I think that brings us nicely into it. I was going to just jump to Randy, who's having, I'll bring him back in for one quick question. Randy, how you doing? I understand your Wi-Fi is probably jumping in and out. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, yeah.
I just wanted to get a little bit of insight from yourself. You mentioned you worked in the forestry department in Jamaica and carbon stock monitoring program. Just before we go into the ins and outs of TOPIM and advanced numerical modeling in oceanography, I thought maybe just a little background to yourself as regards the forestry department and what exactly a carbon stock monitoring program is. Oh, can you hear me?
Okay. What I did at the forestry department, I was measuring the carbon capacity of the trees across the um, um, yeah. So I was measuring the carbon capacity and we found that the native species hold more carbon within their biomass compared to the imported that were used for um, lumber purposes.
Okay.
We also found that a lot of the carbon is stored in the pristine areas.
I think we've lost Randy there again, unfortunately. He'll be back. He'll join into us quickly. I just wanted to get his insights into what exactly a carbon stock monitoring program might look like, and he just managed to get across before he cut out that the local population or the local indigenous species are where most of the carbon is being stored. So potentially then are the most vulnerable or the most worthy of conservation. I would imagine, which kind of makes sense, I suppose, if these are indigenous species, they've acquired through the course of evolutionary time the ability to store more carbon reflective of their environment. And hopefully we'll get Randy back in a little few minutes so he can tell us a little bit more about that. So we've set a nice backdrop then to the actual implications for a changing climate and changing oceans on small and developing states. So with an increase in temperature, storm frequency and storm surges can increase with drastic effects on island nations. Samantha, you've shared a couple of slides in advance, and you can maybe guide us through aspects of this project and how it relates to what we've seen there. if that's okay. And is that slide okay to start on?
Yeah,
That's just a nice little map of the Caribbean, actually.
it is a nice little map of the Caribbean, and it also includes Bermuda. So I guess the couple of slides that just follow this, it talks about, we obviously developed this hurricane prediction model with Bermuda at the start. And what we did, so I was working whilst I was had the opportunity of being out in Bermuda with a gentleman called Dr. Mark Gouchard, who is at the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences and was also at working at the Bermuda Weather Service. So the idea is we rolled out this model across Bermuda, and now we've got this wonderful opportunity to roll it out across the whole of the Caribbean small island developing states, which you can see across that map there. So what we're planning to do is roll it out from sort of 10 degrees north to 30 degrees north, which covers the whole of the small island developing states, from sort of Trinidad and Tobago all the way up to Bahamas, covering the Cayman Islands, Jamaica, Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico.
I could just see Bermuda there as captured in the Our Shared Ocean website, which identifies it as a Caribbean island, actually, but it's probably more an Atlantic island. I know it's grouped within the Caribbean, but it's well north of the Caribbean, really, and its closest land is North Carolina, which is 1,000 kilometers to the west of that. 54 square kilometers and a population of about 63,000. There's a little map there, and you can find out more about all those small and developing states in oursharedocean.ie.
And Bermuda is particularly small. I mean, basically it is 22 miles long by about 1 mile wide. So it's almost not an island in some respects. And certainly from, as you can see on that map there, it's almost like a little rock. And certainly when you've got a tropical cyclone coming over it, it doesn't slow down for Bermuda, as is the case with many of these small islands. The hurricanes, you know, they almost don't see the land because they're effectively fueled by the ocean.
Okay, very good. That's excellent. When I jump on here, so okay, Bermuda is a low-lying island, and you've worked within it and lived on it extensively.
Yeah. So, and what basically when we started this project, we in Bermuda, and this is what effectively we're also now doing for the Caribbean, is we looked at the historical trend of tropical cyclones within 100 kilometers of Bermuda. And as you can see from that bottom plot there, that we found an increase in the hurricanes across the whole of Bermuda. And what we found is that the hurricane intensity over the period from about 1960 onwards has increased by about from 33 knots to 63 knots between 1955 and 2019. And that was very well correlated with the rising ocean temperatures of over 1 degree over that period. So, you know, the increase was around 5 knots per decade.
That's 50 knots to 63?
33 knots to 63 knots. Sorry if I didn't quite say that.
That's almost double.
Yes, over the period, which is what you can see there, and that's 5 knots per decade. And part of that reason is as you rightly mentioned a few moments ago, is that Bermuda sits slightly outside of the tropics. So Bermuda's at 32 degrees north. And one of the very critical things for hurricane development is you need ocean temperatures of 26 degrees in warmth. And what's happened is that over the period, as the Atlantic Ocean has been warming, historically, Bermuda has been in that very marginal area. So the ocean temperatures have been just below 26 degrees northwards. So, but now they are frequently becoming over 26 degrees northwards, over 26 degrees, typically 27, 28 on an annual basis. So they're much more conducive now at 32 north to hurricane development. And that's been one of the key changes over the period and has obviously led to the fueling of the tropical cyclone intensity, because tropical cyclones are basically fueled from the ocean temperatures. You won't, yeah.
Tell us about how that actually works. So the ocean gets a little bit warmer, the water gets a little bit warmer. How does that affect the atmosphere?
Yeah, so basically tropical cyclones or hurricanes are fueled by the ocean, and the minimum you need 5 things basically for hurricanes to form. You need warm ocean temperatures of 26 degrees. You also need weak vertical shear in the atmosphere. Now, what that basically means is the winds at the surface need to be blowing in a very similar direction to the winds up north. So if they're blowing in opposite directions, that means that the hurricane will blow out, and so you won't get a nice stable hurricane. You also need a low pressure in the atmosphere as well. And what we have coming off of Africa is what's called these African easterly waves. And also you need spin to make the hurricane spin. And what that means is that's the Coriolis force. And without getting technical, basically you need to be far enough away from the equator. So most hurricanes form more than 5 degrees away from the equator. So that's why in the Atlantic, we find that the main hurricane development area is between 10 and 20 degrees northwards. So those are basically the sort of the key ingredients that you need for a hurricane. And so as you know, the Caribbean is a prime area for that.
Oh, I was just going to say, so between 5 and 10, is that it? You said between 5 and 10 latitude is the best place for hurricanes to form, and that essentially covers the Caribbean and Bermuda.
Yeah, no. So you need to be more than 5 degrees away from the equator. So 10 to 20 north is the main development region.
10 to 20. Okay, sorry, I get you. I had 5 to
10 to 20 north is the main hurricane development season in the Atlantic, and that is slap bang where the Caribbean small island developing states sit.
And what time of the year does that usually occur at?
So the official hurricane season starts in June and ends in November. So it runs for the whole of that period of time. But actually the peak of the hurricane season is in September. And the reason why the peak is in September in the Atlantic is because that's when the ocean temperatures are at their warmest. And I don't know whether you've seen the predictions for this year, but the Atlantic for this year we've had the highest forecast on record. So on the 1st of April each year, the Columbia State University, CSU, do their annual prediction of the hurricane season, and this year it's predicted to be very, very active. And for the Caribbean, it's predicted to be 20% more active than a normal year. And so that's why, as part of the TOPIM project, we're on a kind of like hurry up at the moment, because obviously we want to get the TOPIM model out and available and running in the Caribbean for 2024 in advance of the hurricane season this year.
Okay, so we're going to talk about TOPIM now. This is the actual project that's been funded by Irish Shared Ocean. It's been managed by yourselves in Maynooth University and the Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences, where Mark O'Shard is, but unavailable to join us today. And just in his absence, Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences, non-profit marine science and education institute located in St. George's, Bermuda, affiliated with Arizona State, and hosts a full-time faculty of oceanographers, biologists, and environmental scientists studying a range of research programs investigating the role of the ocean in global climate and the health of coral reefs and the connectivity between healthy oceans and healthy people. I think it's only fair to mention that. So yourselves are working with Bermuda Institute of Sciences and obviously then working within the University of West Indies based in Jamaica. So we know now that the hurricane season peaks in September between 10 and 20 degrees latitude and waters of 26 degrees for weak vertical shear, low pressure and spin. So what are you guys doing exactly?
Well, in turn, I want to keep it simple.
Is the slide I'm looking at okay for you?
Yeah, that looks great. So basically what we are doing is producing a prediction model, an intensity prediction model. And basically that is like saying what is the maximum sustained wind that we could get at this moment in time in the Caribbean from a tropical cyclone. And And the way that we're doing that is we're building it in the same way that we did for Bermuda. So we're going to look back in time. So we're going to look back to the 1960s and build a hindcast model. So we're going to look at what's happened in the past and use what's happened in the past as a prediction for the future. And this slide that you're showing here is actually Randy's work. So, and as he's just rejoined us, Randy, would you just talk us through this wonderful slide on your work that you've done so far?
There's a time delay, and I think the connection isn't good. Unfortunately, we're not getting. Looks frozen again there. You might have to just pick up, Samantha. We will come back to Randy. No, I tell you, we'll just go ahead, Samantha, for the time being. We'll try and get that connection picked up on the side.
Yeah, so basically, this is the initial work that Randy's done in terms of looking back to what's happening to the maximum sustained winds of tropical cyclones across the Caribbean since 1965 to 2022. And in terms of, what you can see in this plot is that although it's variable, so there are variations each year in terms of the maximum sustained wind from the tropical cyclones, what you can see is the yellow line, and the yellow line is the linear trend. So what you can see is that since 1965, there is a significant increase in the maximum sustained wind over that period. So back down in the 1965, you're talking about something of around 40 knots as being the sort of typical tropical cyclone strength. So it's gone from sort of 40 knots and now we're up closer to 70 knots. So there's almost been like a 30 knot increase in the wind speed since 1965. So over the 50-year period, that's what the initial findings are from the research so far. So the work that we're doing at the moment is now looking at the historical trend of the ocean temperatures. And so the way that we're going to be building this model is that we're going to be taking the ocean temperatures and also the atmospheric temperatures as well. Is it possible you could just go back 2 slides? So basically, we're going to take ocean measurements. So that little diagram on the top left there, that is an Argo float. And at the moment, there are lots and lots of Argo floats going around the Caribbean. So we are going to be pulling into the model the current daily ocean temperatures down to 200 meters into the model. So that will be feeding in to give us the most accurate possible prediction. And then on top of that, we're going to have weather balloons. So we've got weather balloons which are dotted across the Caribbean, and they go up into the atmosphere on a daily basis. And what that provides us with, if we use the temperature, pressure, and mixing ratio, just those 3 variables together with the ocean temperature over a defined depth in the ocean, that is all we need to actually, so it's really quite simple. It's all we need to put into a bit of maths to do a potential intensity calculation. And that just means it will tell us the minimum pressure. And then we've done a wind pressure relationship already, like we did for Bermuda, and that will tell us what the maximum wind strength is going to be at that point in time. So what it will mean for the people in the Caribbean is they'll be able to sit in their desks, they're going to have a website to go into, they're going to be able to put in their locations, such as Jamaica, and then they're going to be able to just put in the date, and the model will go off and run back and come back to them and say, based on today's date and the ocean and the climate conditions, the maximum strength the hurricane could be today is 50 knots, say, or 60 knots or 70 knots. And so hopefully once this is rolled out across like the disaster areas across the Caribbean, it will provide them with something that's really quite simple that will aid them with preparedness for hurricane events.
That's really interesting, and it's based on real-time data come from the Argo fleet.
Absolutely.
And just for
it's a great use of the Argo floats, I think.
It is a great use of the Argo floats, and just for a little bit of context, Argo is an international program that measures water properties across the world's ocean using a fleet of robotic instruments that drift with the currents, ocean currents, and move up and down through the water column. And here in Ireland, in the Marine Institute, we operate a fleet of Argo floats as well. And when those instruments float up to the surface, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, they can send a satellite signal which is picked up, and that transfer all data, temperature, depth, pressure, so on and so forth, and that's real-time observation. So these things are just floating around the Atlantic at various different depths, and in fact, they're trying to float them around the world. And they're named after Jason from Greek mythology, who sailed on his ship the Argo in search of the Golden Fleece, as you know. So very good use of the Argo floats. They're collecting data in real time. They're sending that up into satellite pings, and you guys are pulling that information down and working that into your TOPIM model. Donovan, your team is responsible then for what aspect is your team most responsible for within this?
Yeah, so we are supporting. I mean, obviously you have the modeling side of the project, but then there's also a capacity building element. As you can imagine, there are lots of technical terms that are involved, and it will take some, amount of capacity building for the people who we want to use the model to be able to use it properly. So our work here is to bring stakeholders together across the Caribbean, stakeholders, with interest in this type of output together. We have a workshop that we'll be organizing in July as the initial kickoff, if you may, in terms of the introduction to the model itself. So our work is really to ground it in the Caribbean reality, to make sure that the model we develop is context specific, and that it gets the input that it needs from the various stakeholders, so it can be calibrated to their needs.
Who would you say are your main stakeholders? I mean, that might sound like an obvious question for folks who are just tuning into the podcast. Who would you most like to put this information in the hands of?
Right. So there are national stakeholders. So if you can imagine, people in our Met offices across the region, they would love a model like this to help them to give early warnings to different segments of society. But there are also regional organizations like the CDEMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. They tend to respond when you have major disasters across the region, and so they would have a unique interest in this. And there are other regional organizations that that are involved. The Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, based in Barbados, they've been developing some models as well across the Eastern Caribbean in particular. They also have an interest in this type of model. So there are various regional and national organizations that we're looking to bring on board.
Okay, that's great, guys. Randy, we're going to try with you one more time. I'm really sorry. I know your Wi-Fi probably isn't very strong there. You are the research assistant for TOPIM, so the man on the ground, basically, operating this. What's your day-to-day duties on this? Are you plugging in values? Are you out there building that capacity, working with the stakeholders?
Okay, so what my current day-to-day duties involve is mainly data processing and data analysis. So currently I'm working with ocean data, which is like a lot of data at the moment. Basically aggregating data from different years, from different latitude, longitude. And to date, I'm just at year 2000, and I have like over 63 million points of of data collection. So it's a massive amount of data that we're using that will be fed in to this model.
Well, 63 million data points. I can see why it's slowing down your broadband. So no problem. We wish you the best luck with it, Randy, and with your data collection and the intro and inputting the data then obviously into this fantastic model, which hopefully will have positive implications across the Caribbean. Guys, you've given us a very good oversight today of what life is like on the ground and some of the actual real-term issues that these climate change and how it's affecting the Caribbean. Very good understanding of how we're changing climate. We've looked at increasing sea surface temperatures. We've looked at increasing intensity since the 50s. We know now what it takes for a hurricane to form and why they form. And the measurements and the science and the mathematical modeling that you're doing is helping hopefully to predict where these hurricanes occur, or at least how intense they might be. And I suppose this will work into an early warning system of some description. That's the ultimate aim for this.
Yes, it is. And Randy nicely played down the role that he's doing, because one of the key aspects through looking through the historic ocean temperatures for the Caribbean is also we predicted for Bermuda that it's the top 50 meters that's the best prediction for Bermuda. But in the Caribbean, what Randy's going to be doing is finding which is the best ocean layer that actually is the best predictor for hurricane prediction in the Caribbean. And that's going to be absolutely fundamental for informing the model. And that's the work that he's currently doing and is underway. And it's all part of the capacity building. Obviously, it was great last year when I was working with Randy when he was a master's student in Ireland, and obviously he's now back in Jamaica. But obviously, as part of his development as well, he's learning not only how to code in R, but also how to code in Python. And then we'll also spend some time back at Ireland to do further learning to help inform his research as well.
Well, we're delighted to hear that, Randy. And when you do end up back in Ireland, we'd be delighted to host you here in the Marine Institute. You could give us a little presentation on your work, and hopefully you can tell us about the successes that you're having with it. So I think it's a great collaboration. Maynooth University, Bermuda Institute of Ocean Sciences, and then all the way into the University of the West Indies, with implications for the broader Caribbean region, which I think is the most important. Donovan, is there anything you'd like to say, maybe just to any closing statement or to wrap up?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. One area to highlight is the fact that the Caribbean region on a whole is one of the most tourism dependent region in the world, and we now see a push towards the blue economy and thinking about our islands as large ocean states. So this project is particularly timely because what we're trying to do is to capitalize on this moment with innovation, with skilled resources that we can apply to solve the various challenges that we're facing as a result of the climate crisis. So despite being hard hit by climate change and contributing 1% of global carbon dioxide emission, we only access a very small amount of the financing that is needed to solve the challenges we face. And so we have to put on the table, David, before we finish off, the critical need of financing and support for these types of solutions that Samantha and her team have developed, so that they can be scaled across the region and we can build resilience to some of the changes that we are expecting in the near future.
Okay, thank you very much, and well said. Climate financing is certainly of growing interest. It probably has been in small and developing states for some time, but it's certainly a term and a phrase that's becoming more apparent in the work that I do and who we end up talking to. So that's the way we're heading, unfortunately. Guys, thank you very much for being with us today. Samantha, do you have any closing statements? Are you happy?
Yeah, I am. And I think the only thing I think I haven't mentioned, but I think is really perhaps one of the most important things, is that when we've got this model, it's all about the future, and that we will be able to take, hurricanes that have hit in the past and then model them in a future warmer ocean and see how the increase in wind speed will be. So if we had, an 87 knot wind in a 27 degree warm ocean, could it be 128 degrees, 128 knots in a 29 degree ocean? So, and what does that mean? And I think it's that potential modelling scenario which will, hopefully help in terms of, preparedness for the future, not just this year, but in future years.
Indeed. Yeah, well said. Hopefully we don't get to that, and maybe we are heading that direction, 29 degree oceans, and what exactly that would mean for the climate and for storms within it. But for now, let's get through 2024. So thanks very much, guys. Samantha, Senior Postdoctoral Researcher, ICARUS Climate Analysis Research Unit and Principal Investigator, Co-Principal Investigator of this project, TOPIM. Randy Aird, who is the Research Assistant for TOPIM and Professor of Environmental Geography in the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, Donovan Campbell. Thank you very much for joining us at the Our Shared Ocean podcast. We look forward to hearing more from you guys, and we look forward to hearing the successes of your project, which indeed just one of 14 large projects the Our Shared Ocean program is funding. But we look forward to hearing more, guys. Thanks very much for joining me today.
The Our Shared Ocean podcast is a funding initiative by the Government of Ireland through Irish Aid and managed by the Marine Institute. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find more like it. Subscribe, rate and review on YouTube or your favourite podcast platform. Are you a marine scientist or student based in a small island developing state? Would you like to tell us about your research? Visit www.oursharedocean.ie and we'll see you in the next episode.